But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Do we owe feminists an apology for talking about the way we anticipated that they would respond to International Men's Day? No. International Women's Day sees probably the biggest flood of easily debunked male-demonizing woozles like the wage gap myth and feminism's patriarchy, rape culture, and toxic masculinity narratives. Feminists who spend the day spouting this high-fiber baloney get really resentful over challenges to it. They respond with the demand that they should be allowed to use International Women's Day to publicly demonize men as deadbeats, abusers, and thugs with outright lies and those underhanded lies known as half-truths. Why? Because International Women's Day is supposed to be all about women. Well, no, not women, but feminism. They're not too keen on hearing from women who aren't feminists and don't buy into feminist narratives on that day either. So given their demand that men, or at least non-feminist men who object to being demonized based on lies and chicanery, stay out of their holiday and their hashtag, of course feminists took a step back and let men's issues activists discuss men's issues without being demonized for it on International Men's Day, right?
Don't be absurd.
Some spent the day spouting the same easily debunked woozles and demonizing men. Some spent the day calling it an attack on feminists. Some spent the day trying to invalidate men's rights activism. And some spent the day denying that those other groups were doing what those other groups were doing, getting angry, and blocking anyone who dared to suggest that they were. day couldn't just be left for discussion of men's issues, because if it had been, the focus would have been on all of the causes of male suicide. Not just vague statements about men's feelings, but discussion of the impact of parental alienation, the role of heavy-handed child support obligation in men's poverty and homelessness and how that leads to suicide, how trapping men in abusive relationships leads to suicide, the impact of female sexual violence on men and boys and how that leads to suicide. Topics that don't really provide feminists with control over men's issues discussion. Topics which, when discussed, would lead to the conclusion that legislative reform is needed. And it is badly needed. Custody law and court policy discriminate against fathers. Child support law and government policy discriminate against fathers. Intimate partner and sexual violence law and sexual misconduct policies discriminate against both accused men and male victims of female perpetrators. These are areas where feminists could easily, clearly demonstrate that they're telling the truth when they say their movement is about equality, but instead, they worked very hard to steer discussion away from these areas to talk about the importance of talking about men's feelings instead. Why? Because reform efforts would lead to dismantling feminist-lobbied laws and replacing them with gender-neutral versions which women couldn't manipulate as easily, from which feminist organizations could not make so much money, and for which feminists could not take credit. On International Men's Day, feminists demanding that it be acknowledged once and for all that feminism is not about hating men accidentally admitted a thing. They're right. It's not about hating men. Yes, their hatred for men is real, overt, and visceral. But it's also superficial. It really is not what feminism is all about. It's about control, and they're mad as hell that we're not giving it to them. Hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 14, Toxic Feminism. Before I start, I want to remind everyone, if you want to join the chat, please go to the Badger live streams channel. I'm here tonight with Woozle Slayer Karen Strawn to take a look at the feminist-led response to International Men's Day. Gotta say, we did not expect the gag at the beginning of the show we did on International Men's Day to turn into such a self-fulfilling prophecy, but there you go. And I only put about half of the nasty tweets I found into that video. It's sad.
I just have to say, every time that the introduction to that piece of music started to play again, I thought that, this was the finale.
No.
and the barrage would end, and no, then it went into another round of chicken scratch or whatever the hell it is.
Well, it's turkey in the straw, and it is.
That's it.
It is the U.S. Navy band, if I remember. It's the Navy or the Marines. The nice thing is those are public domain. So
yeah, no,
and so I can use something like that. And I thought, what's more appropriate for a Thanksgiving show than turkey in the straw? Since the feminist response necessitated a discussion, and I didn't get to do the topic I was going to do today.
Considering that turkeys have brains roughly the size of peas, it's fitting in a number of ways. It's apt in a number of ways. But, one of the things that I noticed throughout the entire thing, because some of those tweets were really, really disparaging of men. Some of them were supportive of International Men's Day, right? But the entire theme in terms of feminism seems to be that International Men's Day is a day to critique masculinity rather than to celebrate it. Okay, so according to these feminists, right, it's the day to promote the toxic masculinity narrative, to talk about how toxic masculinity and patriarchy, a male-dominated system, hurts men as well as women, all of these things, right? But there was nothing in there in any of those feminist, even the more supportive ones, in their in their overtures towards, you know, yes, I think International Men's Day should be a thing, or that it's okay to celebrate it, right? There was nothing in there about masculine virtues. There was nothing in there about what is good about men. They talked about the ways men suffer. They ascribed the ways men suffer to masculinity and patriarchy. And there is some truth to, you know, that masculine norms lead to male suffering. Of course, there is some truth to that. However, there was nothing there. I didn't see any feminist tweeting, you know, to that guy who was up in a cherry picker fixing the power lines, you know, happy International Men's Day, right? To that guy who was waist deep in freezing water, repairing a water main in November, happy International Men's Day. You know, for those guys who, you know, are doing cleanup after the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, you know, happy International Men's Day. I didn't see any celebration of masculinity. To that guy who you know, who decided that he was going to shovel my walk as well as his own this morning when it snowed. Happy International Men's Day. You know, like there are a million things that men do that are kind, that are honorable, that are decent, that are helpful, that are done without the expectation of getting some kind of payment in return, right? Just good deeds, just random nice things that men do, right? Happy International Men's Day. There was a man in the store who, and one of the things that really got me today was, you know, like a couple of days ago, I was in the store, in the grocery store, and I was at one cashier, and she was running my groceries through, and another guy who, you know, I'm sort of friendly with, and I joke around with him a bit, was at the next thing, and he was scheduled to go on a break, and he was overdue for his break, and all of this, and they were shorthanded, and everything was, you know, and I said some, you know, I made some kind of humorous, reassuring kind of, yeah, I've been there, done that, you know, hope you get your break kind of comment. And he didn't respond in that moment because he was really stressed out, right? But then I'm at the store today, and he said, I just wanted to thank you for the really nice things that you said. Like they didn't register until I'd gone on break. And then I realized, oh, you know, this customer, she was just really kind and really encouraging and just really nice when I was feeling stressed out. And I just wanted to thank you for that. Okay. Like men are nice. Men are kind. Men are helpful. Men are decent. You know, men do shit that is helpful. This is not just a day. International Men's Day is not just a day to critique toxic masculinity, right? And to criticize the aspects of masculinity that harm society and harm others. And no, it's supposed to be there to, and it's not even just to say, oh, well, you know, my husband changes diapers. Happy International Men's Day, because he's breaking the stereotype and he's doing a typically female thing. No, it's not just about critiquing masculinity. It's not just about celebrating men who embrace non-traditional roles. It's about celebrating men and what they do for us. And it's infuriating to me that on this one day a year, when we're supposed to be celebrating men, right? What happens on Twitter, right? Amongst the people who are in charge of the gender discourse, right, is nitpicking and critiquing and figuring out exactly how men are their own worst enemy, and how men are doing everything wrong, and that's why, yes, men suffer, but it's because it's their own fault, and all of this fucking bullshit.
Yeah, it really got. I was online for parts of the day on International Men's Day, and it really got not just annoying but frustrating watching like feminist after feminist and check mark after check mark too. There were you know, the check marks on Twitter weren't exactly very nice to men either, and I think I had a few of the check marks in that video. But I mean, it was like, what the hell are you guys doing? You know, every year, half the tweets in the International Women's Day hashtag are feminists bitching that they cannot uh, uh, promote their woozles, basically, that they cannot, they call it promoting their issues, but they cannot promote the wage gap myth, and they cannot promote the rape culture myth, and they cannot promote the myth that domestic violence is a male behavior that's only experienced by women. They can't do that without having people spout facts and logic at them that contradicts what they're saying, and they can't make the day all about feminism without women who are not feminists contradicting them. And then they turn around and here's, you know, a day for men, and what do? They do exactly the thing that they are accusing. When, you know, with their complaints, they're saying this International Women's Day is supposed to be all about women. International Women's Day is supposed to be all about women's issues. And they come into the International Men's Day hashtag to make it all about women's issues. And
well, it's not even that. It's if the dominant voices on gender went in on International Women's Day and said, today isn't a day to celebrate the contributions women make and the great things that women do and the wonderful things that women are. It is a day to talk about how it's women's fault that anorexia is a thing. It's women's fault that the beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that makes women neurotic. It's women's fault that you know, so many women end up having to use IVF and other fertility treatments because they leave their reproductive legacy. They put it off for too long. It's women's fault that they don't make it in the workplace. It's women's fault, this and that, right? And yes, there are people who come in on International Men's Day and say that yes, it is women's choices that is responsible for the pay gap. That's just a fact, and nobody goes in on International Women's Day and says, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how the wage gap is women's fault because women make choices that are different from men. No, what they do is they go in and they respond to people, feminists, tweeting about the wage gap and how it's about discrimination and it victimizes women, right? And they go in and respond to that and say, well, that's not really what the wage gap is. It's about women's choices, right? So it's not like the people who are responding to that are trying to hijack International Women's Day to basically say, make it all about how the wage gap is due to women's choices and it's all women's fault. No, that's not what it is. They're seeing people who are lying and then they're challenging that. Whereas in this case, it seems to me that it's like feminists are coming in, they're not responding to a tweet by somebody saying, you know, let's celebrate men today, right? Let's celebrate all of their contributions, right? And then they're responding to that by saying, you know, toxic. Well, they are responding to it by saying toxic masculinity, but they're not. It's not like, oh, men are victims of this. Men are victims of this. Men are victims of that. And then they're coming in and saying, well, but it's toxic masculinity, it's patriarchy, and it's like, you know, all of these things and that. And what really gets me is nobody who argues the wage gap from our side of things says that these women are making bad choices or wrong choices or are hurting themselves. Nobody's saying that the fact that women make these different choices is toxic femininity. They're just saying, it really is just about choice, and women seem to be happy making these choices. And so what's the problem, right? Whereas with the response to anything that feminists can pin toxic masculinity on, they're like, oh, and every choice these men are making, right, is toxic. It's like this is all like a bad thing, right? And so it's almost like you have the non-feminist community on International Women's Day telling feminists just fucking leave women alone to be who they are, and then on International Men's Day they're saying just fucking leave men alone to be who they are.
Yeah, and it's every year we end up talking about the toxic masculinity narrative, and it's so obvious. It's such obvious bullshit. It's nothing but feminists blaming men for the external pressures to which they are subjected, most often by the very systems and social attitudes that feminists themselves support and exploit. And then they blame things on toxic masculinity itself, with the idea that that's a part of men's masculinity, not something that's foisted on them by society. And instead of discussing those systems, those things that are in place that actually force men into a corner, that take away their ability to support themselves by forcing them to support somebody who's decided to break up their family and then not work hard enough to support herself and the household that she's decided to have, and things like telling men that they can't be themselves, things like telling boys all of their lives that they're just wrong for being boys, that they're broken because they're male, all of those things piling on. And they turn around and treat rugged masculinity as if it is by nature somehow toxic, when rugged masculinity is the thing the world is built on. Driven masculinity is the thing the world is built on. One of my things that I had that day, I had gone to my parents' house for the weekend, and there's been family stuff, and I didn't want to travel this month, but turned out I needed to do it anyway. And I'm on my way home contemplating this, right? And I'm like, there's construction. They've been doing construction all summer. It lasts into the winter, and because it gets hot and nasty in the summertime, they do it at night. So there's all this stuff I'm looking at, and I'm seeing, because of being involved in the men's rights movement, it becomes more noticeable to me. It really sticks out. I'm seeing masculinity everywhere around me. And I thought about it, and here I am driving in what I consider to be a marvel of science. Even though mine's old, my vehicle was built in 94. And I'm able to keep driving it because we can fix it at home, because my husband likes to fix cars. And it's that driven. He's been doing that since he was a kid. And I'm learning to fix it because he's patient enough that even though I know jack shit about cars, he's willing to work with me and teach me, and we enjoy doing that together. It's almost like a date night. Go out and, get covered in axle grease. Strange dates, I know. But, and I tweeted about the fact that I drove home in a machine that was entirely conceived of and designed by men, built almost entirely by men, out of parts almost entirely made by men, on roads that were built by men. The fuel for what I was driving is gathered and refined and distributed by men. All of this is done by men. And it got, retweets, and somebody who saw one of the retweets tweeted back at the person who had retweeted me, "Yeah, but who made you?" Like, you can't even give men, who built you? You can't even give men the fact that they do all these things for society, the fact that all of these things, we have all of these things because men are curious, and because when something needs to happen, when there's a need for a result, they figure out how to make that result happen. They engineer it. They do the labor to gather the things that are needed to make it happen. They do the labor to produce those things, and they do the labor to put it all together, and they do the labor to maintain it. And it's men's brain power and men's body power. No, it all had to be, well, how can I top this with something that took both a man and a woman by only thinking about the woman's involvement in it.
Okay, but here's the thing too, right? Because I've been through 3 pregnancies, right? 3 successful pregnancies, 3 successful births. They weren't the most pleasant experiences. I will grant you that. But one of the things about, you know, getting pregnant, at least in an age or an era before easily accessible abortion. So around the time when the oil derricks would have been made out of wood, and men would have been dying, and boys would have been dying. Boys 14, sometimes younger, would have been dying on those oil derricks. You know, when boys of age, 12 or 14 were prior to that, when America and the Western world was running on whale oil, were on whaling ships, right, and all of those things, right. So you were essentially engaging in the deadliest catch for 2 years before you went back to port. This is what men did, and this was a choice men made. It was a decision men made. Falling pregnant, right, and then not getting the abortion that you can't get anyway that's not a decision you make. You made a decision to have sex, right? And in that period of time, the birth just happened. And I can remember being in labor with my children and thinking, I just want, if I could opt out of this right now, I would totally just opt out, right? But there's no opting out, right? The decision was made 9 months ago during a moment of intense pleasure. It was not that I looked at it and said, okay, here's this grueling, horrible, risky, deadly fucking thing, okay, and I'm gonna do it. That was not what I was thinking when I was having sex. I'm sure it was not what my partners were thinking when they were having sex with me, right? No, and then you fall pregnant, and then, the decision's made for you, right? And oh my goodness, so you carried the pregnancy to term, and you did what women have always done, which is survive childbirth and look after the infant. Oh my goodness, right? I risked my life, I guess, when I was, in labor, giving birth to my 3 children. I risked my life 3 times for that. And, those men who were on the whaling boats, who were providing the entire Western world with, light and heat. And then after that, working on wooden oil derricks to provide the Western world with light and heat. They weren't, that wasn't something that was more of a choice for them to do that. They were like, yes, I am going to, and I could quit at any moment. I can opt out at any moment, right? When it gets too rough, I can opt out. When it gets too difficult, I can opt out. When it's too uncomfortable, too painful, I can opt out, right? And they didn't.
Well, I will say, once you're on the ship, opting out is kind of not an option anymore. There, you're on the ship.
All right, yeah, okay with that.
But you do have a very good point. Men, the things that they do that keep society running, definitely are. To compare them to pregnancy is belittling to both. Each one is miraculous in its own way. And what really bothered me about it was not only was this person using pregnancy as a one-upmanship thing, which is really stupid and unnecessary. It's good in its own right. How we already have Mother's Day for that, and they have International Women's Day that they can, you know, celebrate women and talk about how important women are and what women do and what women have done throughout history and everything. One day out of the entire year, we could talk about the fact that men basically make the world go round in terms
They
of,
provide
you
they
know,
provide something unique. They
yeah,
provide something unique and something innovative and something,
exactly.
that is, and
Well, and
this
see,
is
the other thing is, and the fact that we can talk about it, the fact that we have a day set aside, one day, was just too
too
offensive,
much. Yeah.
too much to
Too
this person is like, oh no, but who built you? That makes women better because
Okay,
your
and
mother had a
but
baby. You
okay,
know
but
what? No, it doesn't. It
okay,
doesn't. It
but
doesn't
here's the
mean
thing.
that it's not disparaging to women to say that having babies doesn't make us better than men. In
Okay,
fact,
here's the thing.
it's kind of a gift. It's pretty neat that we get to experience that,
I know, I
even
know.
though it's hard, uh, and it
I
doesn't,
agree.
and it shouldn't take away. It shouldn't take away from what men do, in
Well,
any way, shape, or form.
when you compare us to other species, right? Other species. What do the females of other species do? Right? Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, baboons, macaques, marmosets, freaking capuchin monkeys, rats, dogs, cats, whatever, right? What do the females of all these species do? Oh, they give birth. Oh my goodness, it's such a unique human quality. It's such a uniquely human thing to give birth to offspring.
Well, and if you look at
Um,
some other mammals, I mean, rats give birth to several babies at the same time.
yeah, and then they look after them, and they often, some species look after like entire litters of babies, 6, 8, 10 babies, right? Without the help, without child support. Oh my goodness, look at those mothers go, right? Okay, but what sets human males apart from other males? Because it's what sets human males apart from the males of other species. That's what makes us human, right? That is what makes us human. Because any female of any species is perfectly capable of giving birth. Horse, fucking donkey, hyena, whatever, right? Jackal, whale, dolphin, freaking seal, bear, right? They all give birth. All the females give birth. They're all capable of giving birth. They're all capable of lactating. They're all capable of nurturing young to adulthood. Oh my goodness, right? We're so special as women. That's so very special, right? But what makes humans different from all those other animals? Well, it's what our men do. It's what our men do.
Yeah, and among other things, yeah, I mean, there are different animal species that do different things in terms of taking care of their families and taking care of their whatever you want to call their various tribes, their groups that they live among. But none of them have innovation. None of them are quite as self-sacrificing for the rest of their society. None of them have, of course, obviously the degree of intelligence is dramatically different, but I mean none of
Well,
them
the
put in the type of not just effort but mental activity around ensuring all of their group, not just themselves and maybe their offspring and their little inner circle, but all of their group survive. Some have leaders. Some mammals have leaders that'll do that, but not like humans. And it's
no.
always the men. And it's men have the reason that we have medicine at the level that we have now is mostly men trying to protect humanity from illness, from ailments, from to find new ways to heal humanity's injuries and things like that. The reason that we have made it to the moon, the reason that we are looking at other planets and looking at the possibility of other planets being habitable and things like that, all of that is men looking for ways to advance our civilization, looking for ways to advance our society, looking for better things they can do for their families and their friends and their communities. That really should be celebrated. And where feminists will say every day is International Men's Day, you know, I wouldn't see a problem with it if it were
Yeah,
true.
no, every day should be like, honestly, when I look at the way chimpanzees and bonobos live, right? When I look at their level of technology, when I look at how, yes, chimpanzees have cooperation between males, like, but every male in the group, whether it's chimpanzees or bonobos, they're genetically related to each other. That's why they tolerate each other. In chimpanzees, there's a great deal of cooperation. It requires a huge amount of male bonding. They spend like hours and hours and hours a day in male bonding activities like social grooming and stuff like that. And so essentially what you're looking at is somehow our men have been able to do what no other species has been able to do, what the males of no other species has been able to do, which is to cooperate on this massive, massive, huge scale, tolerate each other on this massive, huge scale, create these huge infrastructures and these multi-tiered hierarchies and chains of command and institutions that that allow for groups of more than 180 to 200 individuals to be able to interact with each other without, genocidal violence, which is like 98% of our DNA is shared with animals that are just simply incapable of this, right? And it's all about how differently our human males behave from how the males of those other species behave. I mean, chimpanzee mothers and bonobo mothers give birth to babies and lactate and nurture them and bring them up, right? How is that special? How is that a special thing? No, the special thing, the thing that makes us human, is how our males are different from the males of those other species. That's and I would be happy to say every day, every single day, should be a day to celebrate men and what they do for us.
And there used to be a lot more ways in which we did that. And it just, one of the things that I have has really bothered me, that when I look back at the way that we used to deal with things like troops coming home from war, or an accomplishment like the building of the Empire State Building, when that was a new thing and everything. It used to be that there would be a big celebration, there would be a big public to-do when we had an achievement like that, and everything now is so compartmentalized. Everybody watches, well, I shouldn't say everybody because I never do, but I mean everybody's aware of things like the Emmy Awards and the Golden Globes and the Oscars and all that, celebration of our entertainment industry. But you almost never hear about the various types of awards that are available, and the various types of recognition that can be done anymore for other forms of greatness. And I think forms of greatness that are greater and are a lot more often almost uniquely masculine. The two guys that ended the shooting in Texas, the most recent shooting in Texas, there's an award that it's associated with, but it is not the Congressional Medal of Honor, and it's a civilian award. And I looked it up. I thought there's got to be something. You know, that there's got to be something that is done for civilians. There's something that's done for soldiers when they step up, but there's got to be something that's done for civilians that do something heroic, isn't there? And I'm sure there's some organization out there somewhere, and it took me forever to find it because apparently Google didn't think it was important. But and there was a civilian award. It's recognition by the government. And I tweeted about it and everything, but and I nominated both of the guys for it, and I hope other people did as well. But this is the kind of thing that, you know, we should have learned about stuff like that. We should be hearing about these things. They should be getting reported on the news. You should be seeing a news report every year when those awards are made, and those guys should be getting public celebration. And those awards go to both men and women, but in this particular instance, the thing that was done is not something that is typically done by women. It is much more typically done by men. When the group of people that is their in-group, their family, their friends, their community, their church, whatever, these guys, it was their neighborhood, is threatened like that. Here we are, you know, two men, and they're
running
just
toward the danger.
They're not just running towards the danger. They're running towards a crazy man with military gear on. He had body armor on, and a weapon that rapid fired. It wasn't just, you know, some guy with a pistol that they could easily, you know, shoot him from a distance and stop him. This is somebody they had to take careful aim at, and they went after him with no armor and just their own guns.
No shoes.
No shoes now. They just grabbed and ran to go after the guy to keep him from continuing to shoot up the neighborhood. And as tragic and terrible as what happened before they stopped him was, the courage that took, because I mean, I would be terrified. I can't imagine that they went into this without fear. You know, men don't necessarily, they're not, everybody knows they're not invulnerable. They're vulnerable just like everybody else, and they exercise that courage to go in when something is terrifying, something is scary. You can lose your life in this situation in a heartbeat, and they go in and do it anyway. They go in and take care of the situation anyway and protect the people in their community. I think that deserves recognition every time it happens. It deserves recognition when men go out and gather food at great risks to themselves. And anymore, it's just food that people really, really want. Like we would live our entire lives without ever eating crab meat and not die from it. You know, we wouldn't die of crab meat deficiency. But there are men who go out and risk their lives to get crab meat. They go crab fishing because the pay will do things for their families that their families need. You know, and there are men, the same thing with, if we really needed to, we could probably live our whole lives without cars. Things would be very different if we did, but we could do it. And men go get the oil, and men refine the oil. Men work in the plants that refine the oil. Men drive the trucks. It's almost always men. We passed a ton of semis, by the way, today on the way to and from Thanksgiving dinner, or well, lunch. And they're all out driving. And I'm pretty sure it was mostly short haul instead of long haul, but they're all out driving on Thanksgiving because they get holiday pay for driving on Thanksgiving, and that will give their families extra money. And they'll sacrifice their relaxation, their holiday, their comfort, their safety, their sensibilities, their lives, just to support their families. And that deserves recognition.
It does. And, you know, you sort of, you look at the drive and the sort of the instinct to discover, and oh God, we're going to the moon, you know, why? Because it's there, right? that kind of I'm going to climb Mount Everest. Why? Because it's there. I'm going to circumnavigate the globe. Why? Because I can, right? I'm going to go to the South Pole, right? Why? Because it's there. You look at that kind of spirit and this is the extreme sort of end of the masculine spectrum, right? But then you also look at, and I won't say that, like, because I listened to Steven Crowder's interview with the guy, I can't remember his name, who grabbed his AR-15 and went after the shooter in Texas. And he said, and like what he was talking about really resonated with me in the couple of times that I've been in a situation where I had to act to save lives at a risk of my own life. And he seemed to be, in that same state where the realization of the situation hits you, and then you have this like big, huge rush of emotion, right? And then it all just kind of, then all the emotion is gone and you just have the goal, right? You just have the goal. And it's almost like you're on autopilot at that point. And I don't know any other way to describe it. And I don't think that a lot of women can relate to this. I think that there are some women who can get into this state. But I think that many more, like the whole fight or flight response is actually not fight or flight. It's fight, flight, or freeze and scream. And I think that the majority of women will respond to danger through that last freeze and scream reaction. But essentially, it's a very, I think it's an intrinsic property of certain individuals and it's not that you're not scared, or it's not that you're not aware of the fact that you could die. You are very much aware of the fact that you could die. It just doesn't matter, right? It's completely, that part of things is completely deprioritized, and all that you see is what you have to do, right? And I think that response to these kinds of situations where people are in danger, somebody's attacking somebody's shooting up a church or a school, somebody is trapped in a burning building, somebody is trapped under rubble in an earthquake, whatever, right? I think that men are more likely to have that process happen to them, where they get this huge rush of emotion initially that alerts them to, okay, this is something, this is a massive fucking problem, right? And then this dampening of everything and this deprioritizing of your own sense of self-preservation and a prioritization of here's what I have to do. And there is one goal, and that is what I have to do. And, when I think about what I experienced, and then I think about all of these feminists who are like, we want men to be more like women. So basically, when your house is on fire, you want everybody to just scream help. Like, is that what you want? Because that's what most women do.
Actually, you mentioned that. Everybody that's gone to public school has had fire drills, right? That's something that firemen came up with and school administrators came up with. Again, mostly men. This idea of practicing what to do in an emergency situation, in buildings where there are numerous people in the buildings and you have to organize getting out. We do them at the facilities where I work. And I work in homes, so it's group homes, it's individual homes, not like a nursing home type facility. There might be, 4 to 8 people in the home, and there might be 2 to 4 workers there helping to take care of them. And we do fire drills, we do tornado drills, we practice what we would do in an emergency so that if it ever happens, God forbid, but if it ever happens, we can get everybody out safely. And that planning ahead, that thinking ahead, this is the idea of, we've seen terrible things happen and we don't want that to happen again. What can we do to prevent it the next time? And it's the same thing with sprinkler systems in buildings, the same thing with changing the materials that are being used to create those buildings when you're building hotels and high-rises and skyscrapers and so on, because they don't want more towering infernos. They don't want more hotel fires where hundreds of people die. They don't want people to get trampled to death trying to get out of a burning bar, like the tragedies that have happened in the past. And that's another thing that, that really sets us apart from other animal species. The ability to not just to run into danger to protect, but to actually come up with things like effective policy and effective plans and effective practice to prevent panic in a situation that normally would induce panic. And speaking of a situation that would normally induce panic, the guys' names were Stephen Wilford and Johnny Langendorf. And honestly, what would you do? Think about this. What would you do? You're sitting in your truck. You've just gotten into your truck, or maybe you've just driven home and you're about to get out of your truck, and a guy with a neck tattoo and a gun jumps into your truck and gives you an instruction. What would you do? That's what happened to Johnny Langendorf. Stephen Wilford had seen the shooter run off. He says, as Kelly sped away,
he'd exchanged shots with him.
Yeah, and everything. In a pearl-colored Ford Explorer, Wilford knew he still had a part to play. He spotted Johnny Langendorf's truck across the street and hailed him down. I said, "That guy just shot up the Baptist church. We need to stop him." And here he is. He's like, Langendorf is looking at this guy, right, with a neck tattoo is not a common thing. And I mean, it's a throat tattoo. It's right under his chin. A lot of people have prejudices there that they're going to assume that this guy is a pretty rough dude. And here we are. He's just flagged him down. Now, in that community, it's a real small community. They might have known each other. But I think if something like that happened in Dayton, the guy might actually be more likely to get slugged in the jaw, or somebody drive off because he's got a gun. But Langendorf didn't hesitate. According to the Clinton News Network, this is the first thing that came up, so I opened it. But he didn't hesitate. He said, I had to make sure he was caught as soon as he knew the information. It didn't even take him a split second to make the decision. Gotta go, gotta do this, gotta take care of the situation. I'm gonna let this man with a gun get into my truck with me because he just told me there's another guy with a gun that's hurting people, and we're gonna go stop him. We can't let this happen. I mean,
yeah, no, it's exactly like the way I experienced it the couple of times that I've experienced that, and it's the most it's an extremely compelling state of mind that you get into, and there's I don't know that that most women can even comprehend what that would be like, to be in a situation where there is an overarching need to complete a task because lives are on the line and you have to put yours on the line to do it. And you just are compelled by your biology, right? By something inside of you, you are compelled to do that, to act on that. It's not something that I would enjoy doing on a regular basis. but it's something that I've experienced, and it's not pleasant, but in my experience, it has yielded results in terms of, you know, people not drowned.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah,
So.
it's one of those things you just, in the moment, you do. You don't think, you just necessarily, you just do. And I mean, obviously there's the analysis, the quick analysis of what do I need to do to get through this, you know, to get this done. But it's afterwards that you think of all the things that could have happened, you know. It's afterwards. For me, it's never been anything quite as immediate as a potential drowning or anything like that. But there's been several times when I seem to be a magnet for, if there's going to be a car accident for some reason, I'm going to be at that location. And I've run into like 2 or 3 of them where it's happened right in front of me, and that's my first response is to run directly towards the accident. And it's because I know there's going to be people that need help, and I don't think about it until I'm part way there. Did I look for traffic? You know, did I run out in front of cars? Did I, you know, do I know these people? Am I going to actually be able to do the thing that I need to do? Do I have the knowledge to? It's not one of those things that you know, you necessarily consider. Am I qualified for this? You just
oh no, you don't.
No, and I mean,
yeah.
There's a lot of things I do know. I take first aid courses regularly to keep up with my job and everything. Very basic first aid, and we had less basic first aid, you know, in school. So I'd be able to handle basic stuff, and anybody can call 911. But it's like, who the heck does that isn't trained for it and isn't an EMT? Well, apparently a lot of people do.
A lot of people do, yeah.
But it's
most of them are men.
Yeah, it's definitely. I've seen more men do it. I've never been stranded on the highway that a guy hasn't stopped to help me.
Yeah,
whether they
no,
could
and
see who was in the car or not, you know.
And you know, the guys who don't stop to help you, they have a woman in the passenger seat saying, "Oh, we shouldn't stop and help."
Right. And
Yeah.
we get told, you know, women get told, don't stop for strangers, don't pick up hitchhikers, which I've done.
Yeah.
Don't do this, don't do that, and we're raised to have more of a sense of self-preservation than your sense of preserving other people, aside from your own children, and
Yeah.
so I like, that's one of the things that makes it so remarkable to a woman when a man has the opposite. His sense is preserving others first. I'm gonna read some super chats because they're really piling up.
Okay.
So we'll start with, I have Blave Kaiser gave us $5 and said, "Sorry, Karen, but I was always told you don't get cookies for being a good person. You know the story of the prodigal son, right?" I think that was when we were talking about
I
men
don't
deserve
know no
recognition.
biblical I don't know no biblical shit. But I don't want recognition. I just want to express, you know, like what I went through at the, you know, when I was going through.
This was actually a response to talking about men being recognized for what they
men's virtues. Oh yeah, yeah. You guys are all a bunch of fucking rapists. So shut the fuck up. And every day is your day. So like fuck off. And also we're co-opting Father's Day for single mothers.
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. Bye.
But yeah, that was the first one. The second one is Moises Salazar gave us $5 and said, "What about innocent men being punished by false sexual misconduct? And that is okay, according to Teen Vogue." Oh God, that woman! Actually, the response she got. One of the things that was very heartening for me to see. I looked through the comments on her tweets, and people were livid at her statement. She said that she was. I don't know if you saw it, Karen. Did you see it?
I read about it. I read a sort of a write-up about it and how people were really coming down on her, and she ended up making her Twitter feed private.
Yes.
To avoid all of the criticism. Yeah.
Yeah, and she, instead of you say something like that, and I looked through the rest of her tweets, and I understand that she was trying to. It looked like she was actually trying to say something different than what she said. Initially, she said it didn't bother her that men's lives were wrecked by false accusations because women. And you go through and she starts advocating investigation, investigation, investigation. Well, I'm fine with, if somebody makes an accusation, it should always be investigated. And she even admitted that accusations can be false, and if an investigation discovers that an accusation should be false, or it is false, that the guy should not be, his life should not be wrecked by that. Well, sometimes it's too late. By that time, he's already, lost everything, because some accusations are more damning than guilt, really. But she doubled down on her original tweet. Instead of clarifying to people as she went, she didn't ever say, I really worded that badly. She didn't ever say, I didn't mean men don't deserve due process and I don't care what happens to them. She never said that. She instead turned around and treated every argument against that as if it was an argument against listening to an accusation enough to investigate whether or not it's true. I asked her a question. Of course, she never answered it because she was flooded. My question is to her, okay, so you've said that you're for investigation, and you've minimized in your mind the damage that can be done to a man by a false accusation. And then she did acknowledge later on in the conversation that men have been killed over false accusations, that teenagers' lives have been wrecked over false accusations. She acknowledged the Brian Banks story. She acknowledged that it disproportionately affects minorities among men, and so on. So my question to her is, then, or would be, if she would hear it, under that amount of knowledge, under knowing that it does have a heavy impact on men, knowing that it is a more common thing than you originally thought, and knowing the public response to it, would you be for or opposed to a legislation that would make it mandatory to prosecute perjury and false police reports when it's demonstrably false, when a woman has made an accusation that is a life-wrecking accusation like that? So if a woman files a false rape charge, or files a false domestic assault charge, files a false sexual harassment charge, a false sexual assault charge with the police, a report with the police, because they're the ones that decide to charge. The prosecutor's the one that decides to charge. But when she files a false report, she should be prosecuted, in my opinion. If it's demonstrably false, same due process the guy would get, the right to have that evaluated, whether or not she knew that it was, whether it was a lie, or whether she had a misunderstanding and believed that something happened that didn't happen, or believed that it was malicious when it wasn't, or whatever. And the same thing, if she goes into court and she tells a lie in an effort to get somebody convicted of something that he didn't do, that it should be mandatory that should be prosecuted. If it's proved in the case that she's telling that lie in, that it's a lie, it should be mandatory to prosecute that lie. If that lie puts that guy at risk for being wrongfully convicted of a serious crime that carries jail time and lifelong penalties, I don't think it's unfair at all to legally require prosecution in that situation. That the liar should be prosecuted. So my question is, if she is all for every single time there is an is an accusation, there must be a serious approach to that, and it must be a serious investigation, and it must be, not necessarily listen and believe and act, but listen and investigate, which I'm all for, listen and investigate. Until it's an obviously ridiculous and false, accusation or something like that. But I'm all for listen and investigate. But if she's gonna advocate that, my balance to that is, because these are serious allegations and because they do have a serious impact on the individual's lives. If you discover that the person was willfully lying to do damage to this person, that should be a listen and investigate situation as well. There should be mandatory prosecution for filing a false complaint with the police, for perjuring yourself in an effort to get somebody falsely convicted and wrongfully incarcerated for a serious crime.
Well, I want to bring up my daughter's case, right? Because I actually want to commend her employer, which is Walmart, right, for how they handled her sexual harassment situation, right? And she had just one second. Okay, so essentially, she had a coworker who was about the same level as her, who was he was hitting on her all the time. He was touching her inappropriately, essentially touching her hair. She has very long, curly, flowing, beautiful hair that clogs up our drains and, gets into our clothes and weaves itself into everything. She had asked him repeatedly to like she had said, I had told her, right? This is a guy, he's from another culture. He's new to the country. He barely speaks English. He probably doesn't really know how things go here. So you need to just make it clear that in this culture, this is not how you behave, right? She did. He followed her out to the bus stop. He was following her out to the bus stop at, midnight, when she was, and asking her, do you want me to I'll give you a ride home. Come on, just get in the car, blah, blah, blah. And all of that until the bus came. And it was really, really unsettling for her. Right. So she wrote a note to her manager and left it there. And the next morning she gets a call. And the very first thing they did before an investigation, right? The very first thing they did was alter the schedules so that they were never leaving or arriving at the same time, and they were never working in the same department, right? So they immediately took an action that was not punitive to either of them. They both retained their hours. They both still had their jobs, but they took an immediate action to make sure that this situation was not going to continue. And then within a couple of days, they had somebody from HR come in and interview both of them. And I sat in on my daughter's interview, and they took it very seriously. They took it very seriously, not just in the sense that that they were, yes, this is not something, this persistent, a month of this guy, just really, really going out, like following you out to the bus stop at midnight, right? That's crossing and trying to lure you into his car. That's crossing a line. That's not okay, right? Especially after you've repeatedly asked him to stop and you have put him on notice. You've said, this is not the way this culture works. You're going to end up getting in trouble. Even if I don't report you, somebody's going to report you and you're going to get in trouble. That is essentially what I told her to do. And it still didn't stop it. Right. So essentially they sat down with her. They took her very seriously. They took him very seriously. I'm sure he still has a job. Rachel told them that she doesn't want to see, he's a refugee. He barely speaks English. He has no skills. where else is he going to work? And where is he going to work if he's been fired for sexual harassment, right? She doesn't want to see she doesn't want to see him lose his job. She just wants him to fucking stop, right? And oh, wouldn't you know it, the bosses put him on notice. It's been a year, right? She hasn't had another problem with this guy, right? And you know, he figured it out that you just can't behave this way, right? And it's like, that was essentially what I think, you know, like they took it very seriously, but they didn't look at it like it was like the worst possible thing that could happen to somebody. And I think that honestly, this idea that sexual harassment and sexual assault are these uniquely monstrous offenses when they happen to women, I think that gets in the way of actually dealing with the problem. I mean, I've said repeatedly that when I was sexually harassed, when I was 21, one of the biggest problems with actually getting some kind of, you know, just even getting my unemployment insurance benefits when I quit over the harassment, my employer contested the claim because they didn't want it to be on record anywhere that there was any kind of sexual harassment going on under their noses that could be substantiated or that had been validated or legitimated by any kind of, you know, authorized body like unemployment insurance. So they would not allow my claim. They had no, I wasn't asking them for money. I didn't threaten them with anything. I just wanted to collect my unemployment insurance. And they contested that because if there had been some kind of record at unemployment insurance, right, that there had been sexual harassment at their establishment, then there would be a stigma attached to their establishment now, right? And so essentially what's so frustrating about this is if we looked at it like shoplifting, or we looked at it like jaywalking, or we looked at it like traffic violations, like running a stop sign, if we looked at it like just something that happens that's, you know, that's gonna happen at times, right, with people, if we looked at it in these ways that are, you know, it's really not this monstrous, massive, super heinous, special type of crime, right, or special type of offense, if we just looked at it like, yeah, it's like siblings hitting each other, right, then maybe we would be able to actually deal with it, right? Walmart looked at it like, okay, it's, you know, it's looked at my daughter's situation and said, okay, yeah, no, you shouldn't have to deal with that. They didn't fucking panic. They didn't fucking, you know, grab their pitchforks. They weren't freaking, you know, out for the guy's blood, right? They didn't think it was this monstrous, horrible, fucking huge violation of my daughter's humanity and her dignity and her personhood, right? No, they were just like, okay, this is a thing, we need to deal with it, right? Yeah. And honestly, if we just looked at some of these crimes, right, and some of them are crimes, I think what Weinstein did would easily rise to the level of a criminal act.
Well, he's under
right?
criminal investigation for it in 3 countries
yes.
now, I think. The U.S., Canada, and the U.K.
Yeah, but I mean, like, honestly, to investigate something as a crime, well, it's a crime to jaywalk. It's a crime to run a red light. It's a crime to drive drunk. It's a crime to, it's technically a crime for my 14-year-old to hit my 15-year-old. Right?
It's technically a crime to have the light out over your license plate on the back of your vehicle.
There you go. And so, like, if like, part of the reason that these things aren't dealt with, and like Harvey Weinstein, right? The reason why, like, and everybody who's like sort of saying, oh, the Weinstein Company, they were so awesome, you know, they were so progressive to fire him and really, like, you know, set boundaries. No, they knew this isn't something that like just came to their attention when the New York Times published their article. No, they knew what was going on, right? And the reason why they concealed it, the reason why they suppressed it, the reason why they buried it under non-disclosure agreements and sealed settlements and falsely sworn affidavits, right, was because they could not afford to have their brand be muddied by any kind of substantiated allegation of sexual misconduct. Oh my goodness, it's because the crime is seen as so heinous that nobody wants to actually admit that it's going on, right? And they will actually criminally and coercively force women into silence and purchase their silence and make them sign gag orders and do all of and threaten their other employees and do all of these things to conceal what's going on because it's such a horrible thing. Nobody wants to ever admit that it's happening. Like, if my kid was accused of fucking shoplifting, I'd be like, okay, he shoplifted. If he was accused of rape, I'd be like, holy fuck, do I want to actually come clean to the public and say, yeah, my kid did that?
Yeah, like, there's a huge difference there, but there's another end of this as well. I think that part of the reason that some gals don't come forward with, especially with more minor accusations.
It's because like, they were totally complicit. They were complicit.
No. This is a personal experience thing. I learned this in junior high. I learned that administrators in a situation where they're in charge not just of employees but a consumer, because at school, you go to a public school system, you're not just a student, you're a consumer. Your community is also consumers of the public school system. They're paying for you to be educated there so that you can go to work later and pay taxes in the community, right? So
you're the customers. Yeah.
So I'm in junior high, and I had bad grades in the 6th grade. There were 2 really big experiences in the 6th grade that affected my grades extremely negatively. One of them was missing an entire unit of the year due to almost dying from a disease that I caught from a mosquito bite. The other one's more personal, and I'm not gonna bring that up again. But it made me it really made me go through a series of personal crises. We'll just leave it at that. And so I entered the 7th grade with bad enough grades that I was put in the homeroom with the kids that were the most troubled, and the kids that had the worst grades, the kids that had the behavior problems, and so on. And I mean, most of the time, to be honest, they were a fun bunch of kids. Because they didn't have boards up their butts, you know, walking down the hallway. I'm being good. I'm behaving myself all the time. But at the same time, you know, I was always really, really shy and high strung, and so the guys were razzing me. I was at 13 years old. I was sort of at a crossroads between that being shy and high strung and starting to look like a woman instead of a little girl. And so I got somewhat harassed, and it wasn't really anything rotten. They basically did the same thing you would do playing follow the leader, because they knew it got my goat. And if I were to try to handle that now, I'd have handled it entirely differently, because I was very athletic and flexible at that time. And there were things I could do that they couldn't mimic. and I would have just done something they couldn't mimic and then stood there and laughed at them when they couldn't mimic it properly. But instead, I got all, flipped out and went in and told the principal that I was being bothered, and I just wanted it to stop. I didn't want a big to-do about it. I just wanted them to say, hey, you guys can't do this. This is really rotten. Don't do that. But instead there was an investigation, and they got called out of class, and it was just like, holy Toledo, now everybody knows it happened to me, and everybody knows I told on these guys, and everybody's mad at me, and everybody's mad at them, and they're mad at them in an amount that is disproportional to what happened. And they're acting like, they responded to it as if they had invaded the women's locker room and held me down and taken my clothes off or something, which not, ever would have happened. That never would have happened at my school. And so then the next time I dealt with a guy who was an asshole, and that was my freshman year, and there was a guy who was a senior who, he was just a dick, and there's no normalcy in the way he behaved towards me. There was something wrong with him, that the guy went back and forth between like the sexual harassment type behavior and calling me a bitch and a cunt and nasty shit like that. And it was like within seconds, oh, you want to go out? No, bitch, cunt, and it was just bizarre. And I dealt with it for quite a while before I told anybody, because I didn't want the same kind of a big deal made out of it. I let it go on long enough that it got physical before I said a word to an adult. And the only reason I ended up saying a word to an adult was because it got physical in public. And at that point, I really couldn't handle it myself anymore, because there were other people that knew about it, and it was going to be handled by somebody. And if it had been the guys I went to school with, he wouldn't have gotten back up. So it had to be the adults at that point. And that, knowing those responses, knowing those reactions and everything, and I didn't know with that guy, I didn't know if he was doing that because he didn't know how to deal with social situations, or because there was something nutty about him, and it was like, if I had addressed it with an adult that was level-headed early on, somebody could have talked to him.
Yeah.
But
No,
instead what happened was, here's this guy who might have just been completely oblivious. He might have been maybe autistic. He might have been raised in a household where he didn't learn any social understandings of how do you deal with dating type situations. How do you deal with if you like a girl? He might have been in that situation. But instead of somebody sitting him down and saying, here's the way that these things go, and here's the tools that you need in order to navigate the situation, it was like, we're gonna press charges if you talk to her again, and I had a buddy that hammered it home by threatening his friend, I'm gonna beat you up if your friend touches my neighbor again. And it was one of those things that, like, as you grow up as a girl, you learn the way the guys around you are going to respond, and the way the men in administration are going to respond. Part of that is because women have made this monster. Part of it is because women have pushed the idea that any encroachment like that is traumatic. The encroachment wasn't traumatic. It was annoying, it was upsetting, it was embarrassing, but it wasn't traumatic.
No.
What was traumatic was seeing the response of the adults around me go from zero to lynch mob in a word.
Yeah, no, this is why I was so pleased with how Walmart handled my daughter's complaint, was because they took her seriously. They took what she said seriously. They also took seriously what she wanted, and what she wanted was, I don't want to see this guy fired. I genuinely like him. You know, like he seems like a decent person, except for this one fucking thing that he's doing, right? And I know that he's doing it even though he knows he shouldn't, but maybe me telling him is not enough to get him to stop. I need you guys to tell him to stop. And so they told him to stop, and they didn't fire him, and they're both still working there. And it's just like, like there's been no problem since. And it's like, all you need to do sometimes is pull the guy aside and say, okay, like literally, I am the person who is in charge of you. I am the person who can fire you, and you need to stop doing this thing, right? Because if you don't stop doing this thing, I will eventually have to fire you. Even if I don't want to, I may have to, in order to avoid liability, right? And so you need to adjust your behavior. And like that was all it really took for this whole situation. Nobody needed to be destroyed. Nobody needed to be fired. Nobody needed to be like cast into the pits of hell and stabbed with pitchforks. Nobody needed to be run up a gibbet. Nobody needed to be executed by lethal injection. Nobody needed to be sacrificed on the altar of my daughter's femininity, right? He just needed to be told by someone in authority to stop doing what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah. And if we could get to a point in society where we have that balance everywhere, you know, and especially in dealing with minor allegations like that, it would be a lot better, and it would actually make it a lot more likely when people experience these things for them to come forward and actually deal with them instead of, you know, like my situation. Like I said, I let that go on a lot longer than I should have, without addressing it with someone who was in charge and who was there to protect us, because I knew that the last time I did it, the overreaction was just unbelievable, and so I didn't want to talk again because I knew the overreaction was going to be unbelievable, and it was even when I said, you know, this is just I just want him to stop. This is just a situation that sucks. You know, that still the overreaction was unbelievable.
Well, didn't you say a while ago, I think it was you who brought up, you know, once mandatory arrest policies were in place, women stopped phoning police as often, right? Because they wanted police to come if it was a false accusation. They wanted police to come, put the fear in their husbands, and then leave, right?
Well,
okay, you were flirting with that bitch, right? And I'm going to phone the police and lie that you were hitting me, and the police are going to come, and then they're going to like put the fear in you, and they're going to leave. Or you've been hitting me or whatever, or we've been hitting each other, and I want it to stop. So I'm going to call the police, and they're going to come, and they're going to tell you to stop, and then they're going to leave, right? And that's what they wanted. And then when it turned into this huge fucking morass of legalities and mandatory arrest and no drop policies and must prosecute him to the fullest extent that is possible, and, you know, rip apart the family and all of these things, right? Once that became the norm, all of these women who really just want their husbands to stop being mean or stop yelling or stop hitting or whatever, or they're having a problem, and they just need some third, or they hit first, right? Or they just want some third party to come in and tell everybody to calm the fuck down and just be a mediator, right? In the difficulty of the moment. And often that's a parental role, right? They want a parent to step in between the two siblings and say, okay, you stop hitting, you stop instigating, you stop reacting. Both of you go to your separate corners now, stand in the corner for 10 minutes, and then come out and give each other a hug. And that's that. And now I'm going to go and watch freaking Deep Space Nine, right? Now that all that's resolved, right? That's essentially what a lot of women wanted when they were having these massive domestic violence incidents with their husbands. They just wanted a parent to step in, send them each to their corner, right? Tell them to think about it, and then tell them, okay, now freaking mandatory hug, and then leave, right? Like they were using the police as a form of therapy, a marriage counseling, in my opinion, right? Okay, but now they're terrified to call police, because the moment that they call police, their husband just gets to go through 6 months of fucking torture.
Yeah. Well, and they can't back off the complaint. They can't change their mind about the severity. They can't do anything like that. The other thing that I noticed with accusations is I've seen in the time period since the Violence Against Women Act passed, I have seen over and over again there's a class of women that once they learn what their legal power is, because I can't call that a right. It's not a right. It's a power. What their legal power is in regards to accusations and what the state will do in response to those accusations. There's a class of women who exploit that. The same way
they use it as a weapon of abuse.
The same way that grandparent scammers exploit the tendency in the elderly to be very protective of their grandchildren and not so savvy about scammers and modern technology and so on. And it's the same predatory behavior. Grandparent scammers call up old people and tell them that their grandchild is in a Mexican prison through no fault of his own. You know, he went to a party or a funeral or something in Mexico and got caught up in somebody else's drug arrest, and they just need to send $2,500 to clear things up, his legal expenses, and get him back across the border, or he's going to be stuck in that Mexican prison for probably the rest of his life. And they got to do it fast because the state is closing in. I mean, they really, really are exploited. So they get these grandparents panicked, and they'll wire them money to pay for their kid who is at home to get out of Mexico. And it's very similar. I see the same thing with false accusers using the standards outlined in the Violence Against Women Act. Only it's, instead of your grandkid is in a Mexican prison, it's the gender of person that your society is the most protective of, whose needs are the most catered to, and who your profession as police officers and judges and court bailiffs and everything is geared around protecting and preserving, is being regularly assaulted and abused and tortured and tormented by this person. Do something about it. Instead of $2,500, it's incarcerate this guy. And give me my kids and my child support and do something to him. It's the same predatory act. But the women who just wanted somebody to come in and mediate, they won't call because they know what's going to happen now if they do, and they can't afford for their husband. And it's the same thing as if you look at the Unknown History of Misandry website, and you look at domestic violence rulings in the early 20th century, in the late 19th century, they were talking about bringing back the whipping post, meaning that it was done before for wife beaters. And they were not talking about doing it just because a harsh punishment was deserved, as in their minds, but because you can't take the wage earner out of the house and have the household be supported. The household is not supported if the wage earner is gone. So they didn't want to take a woman supporting wage earner away from her. So they were going to put him down for a couple of days by bringing back the whipping post instead. And probably one of the stupidest ones was the judge that offered the wife, you can wield the whip, it'll give you much more satisfaction. The truth is most of the time it wouldn't. She literally, he gave her the choice. He said, the bailiff's arm will be stronger for sure.
and inflict more pain, but you might get more satisfaction if you do it yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, but what one of the things, like one of the cases Earl Silverman talked about, and I wish I had gotten the name of this person from him, but it was just like when we were talking on the phone, and he said that there was somebody that he had dealt with through his crisis line, and he had dealt with this guy for a year or two before all of this happened. He was taking calls from this guy, and this guy had essentially been calling him, I took too long picking up beer and cigarettes, so she called police and said I was beating her. Right. Again, she did it again. Right. And so the police came and I got arrested, and I spent 3 days in jail before she dropped the charges. She said she wasn't going to cooperate, and they dropped everything, and I was out again. Right. And then, so essentially for a couple of years leading up, Earl was dealing with these calls to his crisis line, from this guy who was essentially saying that his wife was using the police response to domestic violence calls as a tool of abuse, right? So anytime he didn't do what she wanted, or he didn't do it fast enough, or he didn't do it nicely enough, or he didn't do it properly, or whatever, she would call police, and she would say he was beating her, and then he would come and be arrested and be put in jail overnight, or for a couple of days or 3 days, and then she would refuse to cooperate, and he would be released, and all of this, right? And then he said, he told me, okay, so this went on for like a couple of years, just like a chronic situation where this woman was essentially using the police as a weapon to abuse her husband. And so then he comes home with beer and cigarettes one day, and she's furious with him yet again. And she's got the phone in her hand, and she says she's going to call them. She's going to call police yet again. And the next thing he knows, she's dead. Right? And he's murdered his wife, and that's that. And that's a domestic violence homicide. He was the abuser in the statistics. He was the abuser. She was not the abuser. Right? He has an entire 2-year-long record of domestic violence complaints against him.
Well,
right? And he has never made any complaint against her for abusing him, because how do you even say calling the police and lying is abuse? Like it just doesn't even necessarily compute. Right? And so that case, that was a domestic violence homicide by a man with a history of domestic violence, right? A documented history of domestic violence against his wife.
Yeah, and there's a lot of statistics like that. I mean, I've seen relationships where the woman would push and push and push and hit and get in the guy's face and scream and back him into a corner. You don't back somebody into a corner that has evolved to defend himself and come out of it without a bruise, unless he's extremely disciplined. And and I've seen that. And then when the guy finally hits back, he's the abuser. I have a friend, not local, but where I used to live, who he was visiting other friends of his, and a woman tried to stab him in the throat with a pencil, and he dodged, and she tried again, and he put his hands up to block, and he clocked her right in the jaw, and he has an assault conviction now for that. She didn't get anything. He has an assault conviction.
Oh yeah, of course not.
I had a friend whose ex-girlfriend broke into his place and assaulted him for breaking up with her. And he was convicted for being bigger and stronger than her, and her saying she was scared. She broke in to his place, and he was convicted under the Violence Against Women Act of being too
Yeah.
scary. So I mean, these are all things that are, the abusers of the law will definitely exploit these things. And
Oh
at the
yeah.
same time, the people who just want, they don't want the big to do. They don't want the Spanish Inquisition to come in, every time they have a legal complaint. They just want the problem to stop. They want the abuse not to happen. They want the crime not to be committed again, you know, and that overreaction, that that banhammer type, instant overreaction that
Oh
that,
yeah.
that
Let's
society
let's
has,
start. Let the lynching begin. Yeah.
that's detrimental to legitimate accusers, legitimate complaints, and
Oh,
uh, and
I just
that's yeah.
absolutely I just have to, like, honestly, and particularly in this day and age when most women are on long-term birth control, most women, particularly most women who are at risk of being sexually assaulted, are on long-term birth control, right? When most sexually transmitted diseases can be dealt with, right, with antibiotics, um, and don't lead to long-term problems. When the ones that can't be dealt with that way are really not, the transmission rate isn't like per exposure, it's actually pretty low. um so you're looking at like in terms of, and where the fact that your hymen has been broken does not preclude you from being married, right? Like, your hymen is not intact is not an excuse for a man not to marry you.
And if
um
you don't get married, you can be completely self-supporting.
that's right, right. So I mean, you there like, this is a completely different universe from the one in which our attitudes toward the sexual violation of women developed, right? They developed in a period of time when a pregnancy was a childbirth, and a childbirth was potentially deadly. It also involved, potential mates, potential men who were suitors or whatever, not wanting to bet on that horse because the horse didn't fight the rape enough, or maybe the horse wasn't actually raped, maybe the horse was seduced. And if the horse can be seduced, then why am I gonna like commit to raising all of this horse's children until death, because I won't even know if they're mine, right? All of these things, right? All of these freaking things, that formed our ideas of like how sexual violation of women had these real world uh, catastrophic consequences. Um, and they don't have those consequences anymore. The closest thing you can get to consequences for women who have been raped would be women who decide to go forward with a pregnancy that happens to happen when they were raped. In some states in the US that do not have laws precluding it, the rapist can sue for partial custody of the child,
And that's
right?
rapidly getting handled.
It is. It
No,
is
of
rapidly,
course,
and I don't necessarily agree with it being handled, because Vladek Filler would not have custody of his children
and he
if
wasn't
those
even
laws.
guilty. Yeah, but the
He
thing is, I don't have a problem with it if we were able to handle the accusation better, to where you were not at risk of multiple convictions, multiple false convictions, and so on. If we were providing proper due process and dealing with the situation like any other crime and protecting the rights of the accused, then there wouldn't be a problem with it. One of the problems that I have is at the other end of it. Here you have women complaining, you have feminists complaining that a rapist can go for custody of his child. When a rapist is a woman, when the rapist is a woman, when the rapist is a woman, and the victim
she doesn't have to.
When the rapist is a woman and the victim is a man, not only does she automatically have custody, she can extort him for child support, and she can do it even if the victim is young. Not only young, but too young to legally hold a job. There have been child support awards given to statutory rapists in the United States whose victims were 13 years old. 13. You cannot get a job at 13. You can get a paper route, okay, at 13 years old. You cannot go to work at Walmart at 13 years old. You cannot get a factory job at 13 years old. You cannot go, you can't even get a job sitting on a stool in a security guard shack and checking people in to a factory on the other side of bulletproof glass where you're totally safe and all you have to do is sit there and check people's identifications before they go into the factory. You can't do that at 13 years old because it's considered abusive to give a 13-year-old an 8-hour work shift. But you can be forced into a debt, an 18-year-long debt, a debt that you will have for more years than you've been alive at 13 years old if you're raped by an adult woman and she gets pregnant and bears your child, who she will have custody of, and you are not old enough to get custody of because you're fucking 13. This is what I would refer to as the accountability gap. Okay?
You have to go because a 13-year-old rape victim female, right? She would have automatic custody of that child. She is the mother of that child. She would have automatic custody, and the state would have to intervene to remove that child from her custody, right? The state would have to make a decision to do that, right? But with a 13-year-old boy, right, who is raped by his teacher or his babysitter or whatever, who bears his child, he not only is financially responsible for that child, right, he has to apply in court for not just custody rights, but guardianship rights and access rights. So he doesn't even, because custody is, you have an equal right to access to the child, right? You have an equal right to talk to the child when you're passing by on the sidewalk or whatever, right? That's what custody is, right? Access means you have a right to phone your child or Skype your child or see your child on a scheduled visitation regimen.
We're getting into the whole custody thing is kind of off topic.
And guardianship is you have a right to make to know your child's medical status, to access their not to make medical decisions necessarily, but to know whether they've had surgery, to know what grade they're in and what their grades are. Those are the things that are about guardianship, right? And you have to apply in court at your own expense to get those.
And at 13, you're kind of screwed. At 13, you're pretty much you'd have to have your parents' approval to even go for parental rights. Some people have been asking for some citations. The cases that I put in my letter to my senators about this situation, because I wrote to them about the idea of a 13-year-old having to pay child support is just absolutely ludicrous. But the cases that were cited here, and I didn't put the ages in here, there's SFB Alabama.
Yeah, one was 14 and
County of San Luis, Obispo versus Nathaniel J. And then I have the State X, oh geez, Hermsman versus Sayer. And I believe Hermsman versus Sayer, that one was a 14 or 15-year-old. But I have seen cases. There was one case online, and I cannot find it anymore. I've seen cases where the youngest I've seen is 11, actually. 11 years old. But I've seen cases of 13-year-olds. I've seen cases of 14-year-olds. I've seen cases of 15-year-olds. At 16, you are eligible to work. You're eligible to get a job. You have to have parental permission to get a job at most places at 15. And if your parents put you to work at 13, the Child Protective Services would take you out of their house. Aside from doing household chores and stuff. So I mean, this is and that's a huge accountability difference. That's something else. If I were going to do a show on things that I am grateful to men for, that they pick up the slack of accountability where women leave off. So here you have a situation of a person gets pregnant by forcing herself on essentially a child. A 13-year-old is a child, and is actually able to pay to petition the state to force him to support her. And at the other end of it, if it was an adult man and the victim was female, he goes to jail. He stays in jail. When he gets out of jail, he has to register as a sex offender. The idea of actually
and he can try to get custody.
Well, yeah, he can go for custody, but he wouldn't get it.
He wouldn't
receive
get it,
custody.
yeah.
He'd be lucky if he got even visitation, even supervised visitation. But and he has to spend the rest of his life telling people where he moves to and so on. And that's just the idea, the difference there. If something like that happened to me when I was that age, I would know if I went to authorities that the man that did it would be held accountable. And if something like that had happened to my brother when he was that age, we all know that it would be a crapshoot whether there would be any accountability at all applied to the woman, much less
even if she
was accountable, she wouldn't go to jail for as long. And when she did, she might not have to register as a sex offender when she got out. She wouldn't face the same stigma as a man would.
She'd be able to get custody of the child.
She would have custody
because
of
the child would go to her sister or her mother or somebody. While she was serving her sentence, the child would go to some family member, and then she would get custody of that child back very easily when she got out, which is the case with that one 14-year-old. She served her 2 years. The child was in her sister's custody. She got out. She got her custody back. She applied for welfare. And welfare went after this boy.
And that's happened more than once too. So that's, when we talk about this, I can't think of the woman's name that made these comments about false sexual misconduct allegations and innocent men being punished.
The Teen Vogue woman, just call her Teen Vogue.
This woman had, because she has the feminist perspective on this, she had no idea the can of worms that she opened up.
No.
That all of what we've just talked about here, all of what we've just gone over, and when it really boils down to it, the accountability gap, what she was basically pointing out was that it is so normal in our society to hold men accountable for other people's welfare, that if a woman looks threatened, even if she hasn't been threatened, if a woman looks wounded, even if she hasn't been wounded, and there's a finger pointing at a man, she's okay with society applying accountability standards to that man. But she can't answer whether or not she's okay with applying accountability standards to that woman if that woman lied. And
Yeah, no,
you know,
that's
that's where I stand on that. You know, you have to have, if you're going to have an accountability standard, we hear about the wage gap all the time. We hear about reproductive rights as if the gap goes in the opposite direction that it does.
oh God.
I want to see the accountability gap close. I think if the accountability gap closed, we wouldn't hear another word about the wage gap. If the accountability gap closed, we wouldn't hear another word from women about reproductive rights until men got theirs too. If the accountability gap closed, there would be a significant change in the dynamics of our legal system's response to intimate partner and sexual violence. And we would probably see a significant drop in both.
Oh, one of the things that I found hilarious was a friend of mine here in Edmonton sent me a link to a Scott Adams he does podcasts on Periscope, and but he was discussing the Weinstein thing, and he said, okay, so you know, for the chat, and he always waits to start talking until there's a certain number of viewers and the chat's populated and everything, right? And then he starts talking and he says, okay, so I'm gonna do this experiment again, and I'm gonna ask the men in the chat, right? Have you ever been groped by a woman? You know, like has a woman ever touched your penis, your testicles, your chest, you know, some area of you that you think of as sexually associated with your sexuality, right? And for whatever reason, right? Whether it's, you know, malicious or, you know, being mean, or whether it's because she just didn't think it would be a big deal, or she thought it would be okay, or whatever, but without your consent, when you didn't want her to do that. How many of you? And then he pauses for about 15 seconds. And he says, look at all the yeses. Look at all the yeses going by, right? Look at all the yeses going by.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty accurate to my experience.
Well, and
I will
said
say this: I regularly, as in at least once a year, except I didn't get to this year. I have a friend that will go to the Ren with me. Their family goes to the Ren with us, the Renaissance Fair, and the husband goes in a kilt.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
entitlement.
Just asking for trouble, Hannah.
Exactly. It's as soon as you show up in a kilt around a bunch of tipsy to solidly drunk women in Renaissance garb, running around with their boobs sticking out at everybody, which is nice. But and of course they're going to they're going there to be naughty body wenches, basically. And as soon as they see a guy in a kilt, it's automatically fair game, right?
They're seeing if he's like a true Scotsman.
Oh yeah, you get asked, are you wearing underwear? He gets asked if he's a real Scotsman, you know,
and then they
he's
check
married.
When he says no, I'm not a real Scotsman, then they stick their hands up there and check.
Yeah, and then nobody would do that to a girl and expect to not be kicked out or worse, kicked to the head, boot to the head for that. But no, men in kilts get the amount of harassment you see now. Guaranteed, there are guys that wear kilts for attention too. Just like there are women who wear micro skirts and mini skirts for attention. When I wore short skirts, I didn't wear short skirts because I wanted to look nice, the way feminists say, oh, you just wanted to look nice. No, man, I wanted people to look at my legs. I was proud of my legs. I worked very hard on my legs. I had some nice legs when I was in high school. I was a cross country runner, and I was in dance class, and I was a hurdler. damn well bet I wanted people looking at my legs. I wore short shorts, I wore short skirts, and when I got whistled at, I shook my ass and kept walking or smiled and waved. But being female, if I had decided that I didn't want that and I complained about it, there would be people step up to put a stop to it. If I'd been a guy in a kilt showing off my legs, and I've seen a lot of men in kilts that have some very nice legs, if I turned around and harassed the guys, like if I turned around and wolf whistled and said something, they would be lambasted if they turned it down.
No.
And but in any case, I'm gonna go on with some of the super chats because we stopped at the I can't think of the chick's name, the writer, but we have the next one is Robert Atkinson asked if any of the honey badgers he gave us $2 and he asked if any of the honey badgers are going to the Kilroy event. I believe Brian is on their speaker list, so he's planning on going. I want to go. And I know Allison said she's probably going to go. So there will be at least Brian there. There'll probably be at least 2 others of us there. May seem like
I have said that I'll go if I'm going to be a speaker or a panelist, but I won't go if it's just as an attendee. And that's just the general sort of layout of my life right now, because I have multiple things that I have to go to.
For me, this is something I was passionate about before I knew the full scope of the need in the men's rights area, and became an activist instead of simply saying, hey, fair is fair, and the laws should be not gendered. But even long before, I've always been a free speech advocate. I've always been an anti-censorship advocate. I've always been an advocate of, ideas need to be kicked around, and ideas need to be vetted, and to do that, you have to have public discussion. You have to have open discourse. You cannot vet ideas by shoving them into a corner and saying, bad idea, you can't come out of there, we don't want to hear from you. You either have to beat them down through dismantling them if they're bad ideas, or you vet the idea and you discover, well, hey, we didn't like this at first, but there's actually something there we might want to pay attention to, and that's important. So I want to go partly because I want to support having this type of an event, and partly because I want to see what it's like, what's going on there, and who's there, and basically participate. And I think that's probably where Allison is coming from too. She's not in the chat or anything, so I don't know for sure. I can't really speak for her, but there'll at least be 1, possibly 3 of us. Well, I think maybe a 4th or 5th.
I think Allison looks at it the same way she looked at VidCon, right? Which was, it would be great to go there, and it would be sort of an opportunity for like-minded people to get together and discuss stuff and whatever, right? So to attend as attendees, I think she's more interested in doing that. I don't. The last conference or convention or event that I attended as an attendee was the National Organization for Women National Conference in 2012, and I just, like, with me, it's not so much that, like, I would love to attend, but because I have to travel so much for various things, right? Like, I have tentatively scheduled 3 university tour in Toronto in February. Like, I am away from home too much already, with just the things that, people want me to come and speak, right? And so it's essentially, I'm not, if if the Kilroy Conference wants me on a panel discussion or they want me to speak, I will happily do that. But if not, I'll support them as I can, with my channel, and I will watch all of the footage as it comes in. But yeah, I just can't justify being away unless there's a requirement for me to be there. So yeah.
That's understandable. On the next super chat, we had Cyber Berserk gave us SEC 2000. I'm not sure how much that is in Western dollars or anything, but thank you very much. And he says everything is toxic, everything is eye medicine. It depends on the doses, and I don't know that name. I actually thought that was attributed to a different philosopher, but it's Paracelsus. By the way, where goes the line for toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity? Has any of the feminazi outlets given an official recommendation? Officially, no. But if you take their behavior as any indication, the line between toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity is between being male and being female. Women apparently exhibit healthy masculinity in the feminist eyes, and all of the masculinity that is seen in men, that's all toxic in feminist eyes, unless it is being used for the benefit of a woman. So either way, the line is at women. If you're not doing it for a girl, if you're not doing it for women's benefit, it's automatically bad masculinity to them. And then if you're not acting like a woman would act in any situation in which you're not using your masculinity to benefit women, then it's also in their eyes bad masculinity. Anytime your masculinity is exhibiting itself in a manner that is not for women but for you, and it's not like women, and it's not feminine, then they think it's bad. So that's my answer to that. I don't know, Karen, do you have any other thoughts besides that, or did I cover it?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think honestly, the whole toxic masculinity thing is just a blame patriarchy thing. It's just a blame men thing, and it's just this cop out in terms of, what. There was a Newsweek article just oh god, it was just this week. A Newsweek article where they said that, according to this app that allows women to upload photos of men that they find hot on the tube in London, right? Muscular, wealthy-looking men seem to be, and it was like this whole thing with, oh my goodness, it's gender roles aren't shifting, and it's still patriarchy and toxic masculinity. And I'm like, okay, next thing you know, you'll tell me that men still like boobs and a proper waist to hip ratio in women, and symmetrical features in their faces, and clear skin, and water is wet, and can we get
the same things lesbians like, in other words.
Can we get a $500,000 grant to find out whether water is still wet? Right? Like, seriously, this is what we're wasting money, and we're lamenting the fact, right, that these gender roles haven't shifted. These preferences on the part of women haven't shifted. But at the same time, it's like they're essentially trying, like all of the articles about it have tried to sort of say that it's this toxic patriarchal norm, rather than the fact that it's just biologically what makes sense to women. And if you were to look at these men, you know, women being attracted to men who appear to make more money, and then you were to say, okay, so women are attracted to men who make more money, therefore men will, in order to attract women, make more money, and therefore it's the wage gap, right? And that's a victimization of women, even though it's men trying to do what women want them to do. It's so infuriating. So infuriating.
It is. It is. And it's, I don't know. Well, you know, the really sad thing I thought of, you said that was water still wet, the study idea of what, in the United States, you could probably get that funded. We have had some dumb ass studies funded by the U.S. government in the past. If you ever want to look, I believe the publication that I've always seen, it's called the Pork Report. And you kind of have to watch out for, you know, because there's stock reports and farm reports that come out too. But this is it comes out every year, and it's on government waste, and it's on waste at the federal level and waste at the state levels, and we get stuff funded here. Like there was a study a while back that was highlighted where they put ketchup, various brands of ketchup, on a table, and then they slanted the table and studied to see which one was the runniest and ran down the table the fastest. That was a study that was funded. So I mean, it's just like we get some stuff funded here that's so stupid. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did a study to see if water was still wet. But going on to the next the next super chat. Let's see. We have Yankees Cap gave us $2 and says partners were thinking the Daffy Duck. Hoo hoo. Woo! I actually don't remember when we got that one, so I don't know what it's in reference to. So we're gonna go on. We have Joey Jojo gave us $2 and says caring about men is offensive to women. Well, I actually have encountered that so much on Twitter that I ended up making a very short video reminding people that if you call compassion for men misogynistic, it doesn't say anything about them. It says a lot more about you than it does about anything else. And I've actually had that opportunity, ample opportunity, to tweet that at feminists in conversations where it was a response to something they did or said. If you call having compassion for men misogynistic, that says more about you than anything else. They find that deeply offensive as well. I got accused of harassment for calling somebody an asshole for saying that compassion for men is hate for women, hatred towards women. So it's a sad fact. But the nice thing is, well, I'll get one or two people say something like that to me, and there's a conversation around it, and there will be 50 people that'll answer back and say, "You're full of shit. It's not misogynistic to care about men. What the hell is wrong with you?" And it's increasing. It used to be people wouldn't care if somebody said something like that. They'd be, "Oh, she probably has had bad experiences with men, and you know, you can't blame her for hating them." Well, now people are waking up to the fact that it doesn't excuse hatred. Having had bad experiences with some people doesn't excuse hating everybody that has things in common with those people. So there's bad news in it and there's good news in it. Yeah, it exists, and yeah, it's rampant among feminists, but the general public doesn't find it tolerable anymore. Then we have another one from Cyberberserk, gave us SEC 1000. A German scientist, he says, was quoted in the Spiegel magazine, "Women will always say that they're going to help or intervene in a hostile situation when in reality it's men who show the courage, and women usually don't even pick up the phone and call the police." And that's I think everybody would say they would want to intervene in a hostile situation, and I think a lot of people don't really realize how they're going to react until they get into that situation. I've discovered for me personally, it depends on who is going to be affected by the hostility. And I am more likely to respond with aggression if it's somebody besides myself. And I only end up responding with aggression if I'm startled and it's myself, or if it's been going on for a bit and I know that I'm under a real compelling threat. Then I'll get aggressive. But when it turns to somebody else around me, especially somebody that I see as less strong or more defenseless, or however you want to put it, than I am, it's a different story, because that pisses me off, and I've been much more likely to engage in aggression against another person if they have threatened someone around me that I feel protective of, and I'll do it with less thought, and I'm more likely to overreact to that. And
Agreed.
but
Yeah.
and those are things that I think that's common with a lot of people. And I think probably there are more people, if they see somebody as vulnerable, they're more likely to have courage to intervene than they are if they see someone is able to protect themselves. And because of that, and because women do view men as having less vulnerability than themselves, you will probably see women step up to help men less than you see men stepping up to help women. And just from that standpoint, and it's not to say that it's not cowardly for women to turn their backs and walk away when they see men and boys being harmed and they can do something about it and they don't. That is cowardly. But the idea that that it's a necessarily a gendered thing just biologically, I'm not sure I buy that, because I think it does have to do with the degree to which we view people as vulnerable. And that plays out in other ways too. Like, people are more likely to donate to a fundraiser for an animal's health than they are for the same health problem for a human being, because the animal is viewed as more vulnerable. And animals, especially if it's the type of animal that's dependent on humans for its welfare, dog, people will help a puppy before they will help a human, and they'll help a child before they'll help an adult, and they'll help a woman before they'll help a man. It's something that needs to change. Men are vulnerable too, and it needs to be changed, that people don't recognize that, but it is a fact of life. And
it's the hierarchy.
I don't think it's just a biological thing.
It's the ultimate hierarchy that they talk about on the red pill. Men love women, women love children, children love puppies.
Yep. Everybody loves puppies.
So,
there's something wrong with people who don't love puppies.
I rescued a puppy today, so thank
I'm allergic
you
to
very much.
puppies. They make me sneeze, and they can make me very sick, and I still love puppies, and I will still pet puppies and snuggle puppies and have an asthma attack and take medicine and snuggle the next puppy that comes along. Can't help it.
This puppy was all of 8 weeks old, 9 weeks old, and it was I picked it up off the. I would not have interfered with this puppy, except for it was out loose in the neighborhood, and we have coyotes around the neighborhood, right? And I didn't want it to end up as some coyote's dinner. And so I went and I was like, "Oh, hey, puppy, come here." And he came running, bounding up, this little ball of fur, and I grabbed him. And he smelled like shampoo, and he had a collar, and I was like, "Okay, so you have an owner." And then I tacked a little sign on my fence post saying, "Your puppy is inside, ring the bell." Because I can't leave him. He's walking down the sidewalk, for fuck's sake. He got out of his backyard.
And the story is just made even better by the fact that your dog is in the background whining at you. It just illustrates it.
No, the dog is actually whining to get out and say hello to the coyotes. That's my dog.
So you got a lot of coyotes in your neighborhood, huh? Watch for falling rocks, and if you walk up and you see something tied to a big spring, don't touch anything. And anything labeled Acme, I'm steering the heck
clear of.
Away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and giant elastic bands,
No, no, don't touch
Yeah,
those.
no,
Don't definitely
not
don't touch
touching
those.
them.
And
Yeah,
and and
no.
the slingshot is not somebody's missing item. Don't touch it either. So
No, no. And also any train tunnels,
stay
I
out.
will just assume that they were painted onto the to the mountainside.
Yeah, don't try to go in there. You end up with a flat face.
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
so we have Matthew Ostley gave us $5 and says, "I don't have anything to say," but that's okay because we'll talk your ear off. We'll talk your ear off all night, Matthew. Um, Ryan Field gave us $2 and said, "Did you ever get your goat back?" No, I have been robbed of my goat and I have never gotten it back. It's just as bad as that time I went to the doctor's office and he took my blood pressure and he took my pulse and he took my temperature and now I'm a zombie. So I just none of those things. I never got any of those things back. I probably should file a complaint. Um, Ghostly Enigma gave us $5 and says, after hearing this, I think I'm going to stay single as it's safer. And what I would say to that is the thing that needs to change in terms of women's behavior in relation to men and how it affects um, men's ability to find a partner. Obviously, primarily the behavior itself needs to change. Women that take advantage of these laws need to be held accountable the same as a man would be held accountable. And the laws need to change. There needs to be legal reform. But while we're waiting for that to happen, we need to allow for the fact that just like women and girls are expected to vet a potential partner for character before latching up to him, before getting hitched, before even dating seriously. We're told to shop around. Men should have that as well. Men should have the right and the expectation that if they know a woman and they're interested in dating her, that they should be able to judge her character the same way she is able to judge their character. It's not wrong to judge someone's character. It's not wrong to judge someone's character in terms of, is this person going to be a good partner? Is this person going to be a good mother or a good father? Is this person going to take as much responsibility for our family as I am expected to take for our family? That is how families have survived throughout history. That is how families have stayed intact. That is how you avoid divorce. Obviously you avoid divorce without getting married if you don't get married in the first place. MGTOWs have that right. But it's wrong to tell men and it's wrong to tell boys that you cannot judge a woman's character when you are considering her as a potential partner.
My mama told me you better shop around.
Yeah, and that we get told that. We get told that over and over and over again. Is this guy going to support you?
Well, and men used to get told that too.
Yeah,
men used to get told that too.
You meet a girl's dad. You ask a girl out. You meet her dad. He's going to ask you what your plans are for your living when you get out of school, when you're in school, and if you're an adult, what do you do for a living?
And what are your intentions towards my daughter?
Yeah, what are you planning on? Where are you going to go on your date? What time are you going to be home? You don't get the same thing as a girl when you meet a guy's mom. Now, it was different for me. I had an easy act to follow after the divorce, but I also, as accepted as I was by my husband's family and still am, I also knew that if I was basically a total cunt, that acceptance would be withdrawn real fast. They had expectations, and they were good expectations, and it felt good to be able to meet those expectations, just like it felt good to be able to meet my husband's expectations as a partner and an adult in the relationship. But a lot of times when I've had, before I got married, when I had boyfriends and I met their mothers, it was all social. You know, it was very relational aggressive, where, you know, you're getting looked at, but there's no direct message of, these are my expectations and you'd better meet them if you want my approval.
Oh, there was no, what are your intentions toward my son?
Yeah, no.
Right?
None of that.
At all.
None of that. You know, and it used to be that way. You used to have to impress the mother. You know, you used to have to impress the sisters too. You know, my brother's girlfriends, I made my expectations known. You know, you better not hurt my little brother if you want to live. But it's unusual anymore for that, and that's bad. That is one of the reasons why we have such a high divorce rate, and most divorces are initiated by women. And a lot of times it's not because the guy did something bad. It's not one-sided. It's because they have, quote, drifted apart, which means that either one or both partners has not been invested in maintaining family unity and marital unity.
Yeah.
Or it's because they get bored, which I really don't understand. And it's not just because I don't get bored. It's also because I recognize, because I know I know what people do when they get bored. They look for a way to alleviate their boredom. If you love and care about someone, and you have made your life with this person, and you get bored, you spice up your life as a couple together. You do things. If you're bored, he's probably bored too. You know, so you do something that the two of you can be excited about together. You don't go out and cheat and leave. But yeah, this idea of I can understand why there are men going their own way. I can with all of this shit that has been dumped on men in society. I can understand that. And I think that the remedy for it, besides the obvious reform that needs to happen, the immediate remedy for it is you have to have the right and the responsibility to vet women for character. And it's that society doesn't give you permission should not be a reason why you don't do it.
Yeah,
do it anyway.
This is really the thing, and you protect yourself up until, you know, just like a woman would essentially use her own birth control or ask you to use a condom until she's willing to, you know, commit to having a child with you. You know, like those are things that are within, stop it, dog, are within her realm of control, right? And she is able to, you know, take some time and vet you and find out what kind of man you are before she actually like gets into something that's 100% permanent. And it doesn't matter whether you don't want to have a dog, shut up, whether you don't want to have a relationship with a woman or a relationship with a man. When you have a kid, that necessitates a certain amount of connection for the next 18 years to some degree or another, right? So essentially you need to look at it and you need to be, dog, I'm going to fucking murder you. She has been like whining. She really wants to get out and have sex with the coyote.
Typical female.
Oh God, she is just absolutely ridiculous. She just, and the coyote just is like hanging out on our front porch practically. So
you're going to go out there and you're going to see him holding up a sign, but instead of, you know, one of the signs that you see in the cartoons, it's just going to say hubba hubba.
Actually, maybe he'll hold up a parasol.
There you go.
You know, he'll be sitting on my front porch holding a parasol to protect him from falling rocks. But he he is here all the time, and he is actively courting my dog. And my dog is very enamored of him.
So would you say he's dogging her?
He's dogging her, and she is she's fully on board with that, and I'm just like, really, like, we have snow all over the place right now, and my entire yard is just it's like a moonscape of coyote tracks, front and back, sides, everywhere, all around my house, just a moonscape of coyote tracks.
Jeez.
This coyote wants to. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just, because she's being really, really obnoxious right now. So
yeah. So, well, we're gonna go ahead and I think end the show here. It's 10:30. And I was gonna go for a short show tonight, but this topic actually kind of turned out to be rather inspirational for the super chats. Well, and we ended up with quite we ended up with quite a bit to respond to. It was really good. But my last thing for tonight, besides the fact that we were able to point out that, you know, feminists are basically full of shit when it comes to toxic masculinity. This was definitely an exercise of toxic feminism on the part of feminists in response to the hashtag. I also want to remind everybody that we here at Honey Badger Radio, we have been labeled guilty of wrongthink. It's one of the reasons we're also passionate about this Kilroy event. We're very passionate about free speech. We're very passionate about the vetting of ideas, and that really puts us in the crosshairs. That puts a big target on our backs and the backs of everybody like us that talks like this. And as such, we are on the wrong side of YouTube. And if you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because our channels have been incarcerated, go to badgerfeed.com. And we're also going to be moving to a digest format for podcasting. So if you're listening to this in the audio format and you still want to follow our uncut live streams, you'll be able to find those at badgerfeed.com as well. So just go to badgerfeed.com. It's where all the cool kids are. And with that, thanks, Karen, for being on with me. Thanks for everybody that came on to listen, especially, you know, everybody that is sitting there staying awake with a belly full of Thanksgiving turkey here in the United States.
Thanksgiving meatloaf here in Canada.
Thanksgiving meatloaf. We do turkey and ham.
Well, so, we do turkey and ham on Thanksgiving, but the proper Thanksgiving is in October. Thank you very much.
Well, that's your Thanksgiving.
Today is just another day here in Canada.
Yep. For you Canadians, thanks for listening just because you listened. But in any case, thanks to all, and have a good night.